We are going to do another chapter from the BFG. This chapter is called Dreams. It's a long chapter, so settle in. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in the cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream that had been caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" Sophie asked him. "Every dream is having a special label on the bottle," said the BFG. "How else could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry?" "But can you really and truly tell what sort of dream it is going to be simply by listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," the BFG said, and not looking up. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "You is less or more right," the BFG said. "Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum music, and these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music, do you mean tunes?" "I is not meaning tunes." "Then what do you mean?" "Human beings is having their own music, right or left?" "Right," Sophie said. "Lots of music." "And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wonderful music. They is getting shivers down their spindles, right or left?" "Right," Sophie said. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what that message is, but they is loving it all the same." "That's about right," Sophie said. "But because of these jump squiveling ears of mine," the BFG said, "I is not only able to hear the music that dreams is making, but I is also able to understand." "What do you mean by understanding it?" Sophie said. "I can read it," the BFG said. "It talks to me. It's like a language." There's the BFG and Sophie, and he's writing with his really big pencil. Remember, he has those humongous ears. And I can see the jar that has the dream in it. I find that just a little hard to believe," Sophie said. "I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe in quackwinkles," the BFG said, "and how they is visiting us from the stars." "Of course I don't believe in that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me," he said, "if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not. They is nearly all of them non-munchers and squish peeps." "I beg your pardon?" Sophie said. "The matter with human beings," the BFG went on, "is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they is actually seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course, quadwinkles is existing. I is meeting them oftenly. I is even chit-chattering to them." He turned away contemplatively from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so far. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not very well formed. Here is what they said. "This dream is about how I is saving my teachery from drowning. I is diving in the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him a kiss of death." There's that illustration to go along with the dream. The kiss of what?" Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. "I is telling you once before," he said quietly, "that I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. They is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself." "I'm sorry," Sophie said. "I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you." The BFG gazed at her for a while longer, and he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. Tell me honestly, Sophie said. If you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off of a bridge? More, the BFG said, a lot more. But I cannot be scribbling a whole funkling dream on a titchy little bit of paper. Of course there is more. The BFG laid down the pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding his great head solemnly up and down. This dream is continuing very nice. It has a very dory honky ending. How does it end? Sophie said. Please tell me. You would be dreaming, the BFG said. In the morning after you was saving your teacher from the river, you was arriving at school and you was seeing all 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall and all the teachers as well. And the head teacher is standing up and saying, I is wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave for saving the life of the one and finest academic teacher, Miss Figgins, who is unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is cheering like mad and shouting, Bravo, well done! And forever after that, even when you was getting your sums of gunswingles and muggles up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 for writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. And you is waking up. I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It's a fizz wizard. He licked the back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I is usually writing a bit more than this, but on the label, he said, but you was watching me is making me jump seas. I'll go sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you will be seeing this dream. Sophie peered in the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something that was the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of color in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small oblong sea green jellyish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful and pulsing gently. The whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It's not needing any food, the BFG told her. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs some sort of food, even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody is feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it's a waiting peaceful forever until it is released to and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here is some of the good dreams, he said, the fizz wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. The labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dream is usually much longer. The label is just for reminding me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. Today I is sitting in class, and I discovered that if I is staring very hard at my teacher in this special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end, her head drops onto her desk, and she goes fast asleep, snorkeling loudly. Then it in marches the head teacher, and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumbridge! How dare you be sleeping in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave this school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy, I is putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumbridge. And when I is hearing my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up! It is breakfast is ready." Look, and there's the illustration of the head teacher, or it's kind of like the principal, and he's sound asleep on the floor. "That's a funny dream," Sophie said. "It's a ring beller," the BFG said. "It's a whoopsies." Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a trifle larger. "But you have a separate dreams for boys. Do you have separate dreams for boys and for girls?" Sophie asked. "Of course," the BFG said. "If I is giving a girl's dream to a boy, and even if it is really whoopsie girl's dream, the boy would be waking up thinking that a rock-buckling, grip-scumber old dream that was." "Boys would," Sophie said. "These here is all the girls' dreams on this shelf," the BFG said. "Can I read a boy's dream?" "You can," the BFG said, and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows: "I is making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she is starting to yell at me, as she always does, yelling what on earth I is doing up there walking on the ceiling. And I looks down at her and I smile and say, 'I told you she was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it.'" You can see the illustration for that dream. Look at those suction boots that the boy has made. He's up on the ceiling. "I find that one rather silly," Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another ring beller. Perhaps you is seen enough now. Let me read another boy's dream," Sophie said. The next label read, "The telephone rings in the house, and my father picks it up and says it is very important. Telephone voice. 'Simpkins speaking.' When his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, 'What? Who?' And when he says, 'Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son.' My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he is as a lobster stuck in his throat. And then at last he's saying, 'Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir.' And he turns to me and he says, it's rather respectful voice, 'Is you knowing the President of the United States?' And I say, 'No, but I expect he is hearing about me.' Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, 'Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle all up if you do it yourself.' And my father's eyes goggling right out of his head. And that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, 'Get up, lazy Slav, you'll be late for school.'" Another illustration of that dream with the boy on the phone and his dad looking on. "Boys are crazy," Sophie said. "Let me read the next one." Sophie started reading the next label. "I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on the tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me suddenly. My legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, 'Where is that child? He is in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly.' So I says, 'Here I is.' And she says, 'Where?' And I say, 'Here.' And she says, 'Where?' And I say, 'Here.' And she yells, 'Henry, Come up quick! And when my daddy rushes in and I is washing myself and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air. But of course he is not seeing me and he shouts, "Where are you, boy?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "The soap, boy, the soap. It's flying in the air." Then I press my tummy button again and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement and he says, "You is the invisible boy." And I say, now I is going to have some fun. So when I is out of the bath, I have dried myself and put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible. And I go down into the town and walk in the street, and of course only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic with everybody yelling, "A ghost! A ghost!" And people is screaming left and right, and a big strong policeman is running for their lives. Best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my algebra teacher, coming out of the pub. A pub is like a restaurant and a bar. And I float up to him and say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub. And when I is waking up and feeling happy as a wish fiddler. And there's that illustration. You can see a dressing gown is kind of like a robe. And he has the slippers, but you can't see the boy at all. He's become invisible. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even the brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here. She started reading. I has written a book, and it is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you is hooked on it. You cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book. And dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and the cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they are operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it while going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement that being the greatest writer in the world has ever known until my mummy comes in and says I was looking at the English exercise book last night, and really your spelling is atrocious. So is your punctuations. Look at all those people reading the same book. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There is dillions more, but my arms is getting tired holding you up. What are all of those over there? Sophie said. Why have you got, they have such tiny labels. That, the BFG said, is because one day I is catching so many dreams I is not having time or energy to write such long labels. But there is enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. All right, let me try to read it like this so you can see, too, the illustrations. I is climbing Mount Everest with just a pussy cat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make electric lights go out just by wishing it. I is the only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid, bushy beard, and all of the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. Oh, that'd be fun. Those sound like wonderful dreams. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I've been wondering how long it is before you asked me that. Considering that you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hands. One night, the BFG said, I is blowing a dream through a window and I see this book lying in the little boy's bedroom table. I is wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I is refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short little time I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked him. I is reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said, and I is still reading it and teaching new words to myself, and how to write them. I is most scrumdiddlyumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read out loud. By Doll's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Sophie said. Just then, there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That is all the giant zip fizzing off to the other countries to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket and hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where's you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all of us flub-spungling off to England tonight, answered the flesh-lump Peter as they were galloping past. England is a luscious land, and we is fancying a few nice little English childers. I, shouted the maid masher, is knowing where there is a giggly house of girls, and I is guggling myself full as a frosh blower. Ugh, and I knows where there is a boggle box of boys, shouted the gizzle-glupper. All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra lickish wishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking his head out of the pocket. What is a giggle house of girls? He is meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He will be eating them by the bundle. Oh, no, cried Sophie. And boys from a boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do, the BFG said. We is helpless in horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance of his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until it is coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. That is the end of that chapter. Next we'll read The Great Plan.